Welcome to my Bob Thurman podcast. I'm so grateful some good friends enabled me to present them to you. If you enjoy them and find them useful, please think of becoming a member of Tibet House US to help preserve Tibetan culture. Tibet House is the Dalai Lama's cultural center in America. All best wishes. Have a great day.
This is episode 337.
Hi, Matteo. How are you? I'm so happy to see you.
It is so good to see you, Bob.
First, before we start our conversation, Matteo Pistono is an author, meditation teacher, and conscious breathing guide. Breathing, and I really love it. I feel guided in my breathing since I read his wonderful book. He's written numerous books, including the one which he'll speak about today, Breathe How You Want to Feel. Your breathing toolkit for better health, restorative sleep, and deeper connection. His previous books include In the Shadow of the Buddha, Fearless in Tibet, Life of the Mystic Tertan Sogyal. He just showed me a portrait of him, I think. Roar, Sulak Sivaraksa, and the Path of Socially Engaged Buddhism, which is, I didn't know, I sort of knew you were into that, but I didn't know that much. And then Meditation, Coming to Know Your Mind. Wonderful. I first met Matteo 25 years ago when he was working with the Smithsonian Institution on Tibetan cultural programs. And later when Matteo worked on human rights issues in Tibet, that's what I really knew Matteo from. And I'm so amazed at all these other dimensions that I discovered since I got this great breathing book. I read Matteo's first book, In the Shadow of the Buddha, and I wrote, which I don't remember now, but when I did it, what a fabulous saga, a mystical tale of defending the land of Buddhadharma at the turn of the 20th century. That's what I remember him with, interwoven with the life and death struggle now going on at the turn of the 21st. Still, the genocide in Tibet is still going on. This moving account is written beautifully from the heart, and it lifts the heart to read it. It is both unearthly and powerfully real. I recommend it with the strongest enthusiasm. And I'm so pleased that I was wise enough to write that before Matteo. Thank you for quoting that. Matteo began his study of meditation and breath over 30 years ago while living in Nepal and Tibet. Informed by his study of Tibetan Buddhism and Hatha Yoga, extensive periods of solitary meditation, and pilgrimages across the Himalayan landscapes, Matteo offers an engaged approach to ancient wisdom traditions. Matteo has a master's degree in Indian philosophy from the University of London under Professor Alexander Piatigorsky. Really, that also I'm amazed.
Mm-hmm.
I met him briefly long ago. Matteo's writings about Tibetan and Himalayan culture, politics, and spiritual landscape have appeared in the Washington Post, BBC, Men's Journal, and elsewhere. And Matteo sits on the Executive Council of the International Network of Engaged Buddhists. That's amazing, Matteo, such an amazing thing. And what I want to say is what is amazing to me about this book, Breathe How You Want to Feel, what I was so amazed and delighted to receive it, is that it is a Dharma book, but it's not a Dharma book. It's a more general thing for people who have ill health, who don't sleep well, and actually, to their own amazement, will discover that they don't breathe well, or rather that they could breathe a lot better.
Sure.
And that's an amazing service to people in the sense that, it's like the ultimate yoga thing. in the sense that you're making life a yoga, and then otherwise you just sort of breathe away whatever you have a habit of breathing.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, it's a major thing that your body does to keep alive. And so to learn to use it better for your own benefit is an amazing thing. And I think people from any tradition, any religion, or no religion can use it extremely well. So I'm delighted, and I believe it's going very well in spreading, through Amazon and other things. And
Yeah.
I think really wonderful. I think that's great. So, how did you decide to do this kind of a book?
Yeah.
How did you sort of get the inspiration for that? Sort of
Yeah.
more
You know,
general.
it's really clear where it came from, Bob. Had been teaching meditation and sharing meditation. I mean, I started
Mhm,
about 15 years ago. And
mhm,
and what I found were the people who I was meditating with or I was teaching meditation to, they were coming with such elevated nervous systems
mhm,
that they were having difficulty coming into the practice of meditation, right? Because
uh-huh,
oftentimes the practice of meditation can be or various contemplations can be very mental. But their
uh-huh.
systems, if we talked about this from the Tibetan medical system, we would say that their lung was out of balance. So lung was very high. The wind energy was very, very high, right? So people were coming with this elevated nervous system. And then, we were asking them to sort of practice shamatha, for example, but there was no calm abiding happening because they were trying to use an anxious mind to overcome anxiety. And while it's
Mhm,
possible, it's a heavy lift. And so I started using my background in in pranayama and breathing
uh-huh,
science to
uh-huh,
down regulate their system to create this perfect container, the body, so meditation then
mhm,
could arise. And that's where it started. And then when our mutual friend Patty Gift, when she heard that I was doing this, she said, you should put this into a book. And as you mentioned, Bob, I purposefully didn't use a lot of jargon. I didn't use all of the Sanskrit from pranayama, or even the
yes,
sort of my other study and practice of Tsalung within the Tibetan tradition. I used the sort of
right.
map of understanding was physiology.
It's really, really, really useful, I think. That's amazing. And you really did it well. Like certain things, one of my favorite things is this um, old school boom box or music producer's dial on a mixing board
Yeah,
on page
I was thinking of
32,
Rick Rubin when I wrote that.
where you have three dials that you can do strength and pace and depth. And how did you, that's unique. I don't think I've ever seen that.
Yeah,
And I think it's so useful and usable and
it is
amazing.
it's so useful. So Bob, like the we can use the quickest way to intervene in our nervous system that we have access to. Like, I mean, you
Yes.
could pray to Jason Kappa, please calm my mind right now. And it may happen in a heartbeat, but there's, there's other depending factors, right? We could pray to the Virgin Mary, or we could do positive affirmations, or we could do a whole host of other things. And I think that
Yes.
all of those things are amazing, but nothing works as immediately as taking hold of your breath and doing something with it. And all we have
Mm-hmm.
to do is learn what to do. And it's not
Uh,
esoteric. And
uh-huh.
that's these dials. And this is one of the things that I present in the book, is that there's these dials on our nervous system,
Uh-huh.
dials on our breathing system that affect the nervous system. So, for example, if we take a longer breath on the exhale than we do on the inhale, it's deeply relaxing. It turns on our relaxation response. And the opposite, if we breathe in for longer than we breathe out, it brings energy into the body. And so
Mhm.
my approach to this is, if we take it from a meditator standpoint, I use this like all the time. I
Mhm.
sit down and practice, and I just check in for a moment. How am I feeling? Like, am I lethargic, or am I up in my head? Am I thinking a lot? And then I adjust my system through a 2 or 3 minute breathing intervention, right? I adjust the
Mhm.
system. And I do
Mhm.
this also when if I'm doing sadhana practice, after an
Mhm.
hour or two, when the mind starts to sink, if I need to bring energy into the body, there's various ways. And this is one way that we can do it with these different dials on our system, with the strength of our breath, right? If we breathe very powerfully,
Right.
like the strength, or super lightly, right? That's the strength of the breath. The pace of the breath, or if we do this with sort of like with cadences, if we inhale for 4 count and out for a 4 count, or if we adjust that, or the depth, like if we breathe very like just very lightly with very small breaths or very big breaths. And all of these things, when we combine them, have an effect on how we feel. And once we know that, then we have agency over how we feel. We aren't so dependent upon external circumstances, the impact that they have on us.
That's wonderful. It is really wonderful. When you think that all of the people who do the wildly popular mindfulness meditation practice, they all end up counting their breath and breathing and focusing on the breath.
Yeah.
And of course, it's a major thing in Buddhism at that super advanced level. Then you're mixing mantras with breath and so forth, at the Vajra repetition level. And nobody until this book has brought that out as a separate discipline to be able to use. Another thing I immediately thought as I was reading about Thomas Jefferson's famous thing about how you take a deep breath or take 10 deep breaths if you're dealing with some very angering and difficult situation. But meanwhile, whether you do deep or you do shallow, or that makes a big difference.
It has a huge difference. Oftentimes, Bob, people will say, right, like our loved ones or our partner or somebody will say, if we're stressed, they'll say, just take a deep breath. And what do most people do? If you tried this, I actually suggest this in the book, do a breathing experiment to your friend, say, hey, take a deep breath. And most people will go, they'll breathe in very forcefully through their nose and collapse, or they'll gasp as if a grizzly bear just came in through the door. And it's this very sharp breath, right? And it's not deep at all. They use their upper chest and their neck muscles. Instead of to take a deep breath, we breathe light, slow, and with the diaphragm, LSD breathing. That's why I talk about LSD breathing, light, slow, and deep breaths. And this is the way to take LSD breathing. Yeah, I figured you would like that, based on your the 60s.
That's your psychedelic version. That's very good. LSD. I also like what you said. I never thought of that. When you said that when you focus on the diaphragm, that it's sort of like an umbrella that opens and closes, and it sort of massages the upper organs, especially the liver and the spleen, and it can have a vivifying effect and a stimulating effect on your very important physical organs. And I think people have no idea of that.
And Bob, when we're not doing that, if we aren't breathing in an anatomically optimal way, if we through the nose and using this just belly breathing, just light belly breathing, if we're breathing, say, with our mouth open all day and sort of taking these little guppy breaths or using our shoulders, what we end up doing is that we end up juicing our system all day and through the night, perhaps, with adrenaline and cortisol and other stress hormones, instead of having this more spacious, having our rest and relaxation mode on for most of the day. Now, that's not to say, and that's the way that I present in the book, it's not to say that we don't want to be able to energize our system when we want to, right? And so we have that. What I'm talking about here is having agency over our nervous system. Right. So say, for example, if something comes up on our screen, on the news or something, and we sense, we can feel that constriction in our system. We have that awareness, and then we have a choice. Okay, I'm going to just sit there and be annoyed for the rest of the day, or no, I'm going to downregulate right there and then, right?
Especially some of the characters who come on television.
Oh my gosh, we need this right now. We totally need this right now. Coming into the next 4 or 5 months with the political season, we need to be able to have some, like I said, agency over ourselves. If not, we become, because the only thing that we can, the only thing that we really have control over is our reaction. The external situation, I mean, we can try to have some impact, and I'm very involved with socially engaged Buddhism, right? I'm trying to affect the systems, But even so, things don't always work out. And what I do have control over, some agency over, is my reaction. I quote Viktor Frankl, at the beginning of the book, that it's a very Buddhist approach too, between stimulation and reaction, there's a gap. And in that gap is where freedom is found. And he wrote that, when in a Nazi concentration camp. Extraordinary amount of stimulation happening around him, and he found that he had some sort of freedom. Yeah,
it's very effective, that quote. It really is.
Yeah,
and I love the idea of helping people find their own agency to manage their own behavior, their system, the way they feel. Even the title is very unusual. Breathe how you want to feel. The combination of breathe how. Did Patty help you with that, or you came up with that entirely yourself?
no, it came up while I was sleeping, and a lot of times when I write, Bob, when I'm in the mode, things come up, and so I'll write down. Like, I just have a notebook and I'll just write down in the dark, and that title was arrived like that. It doesn't always happen that way with me. Sometimes the writing process is like it's a slog, but that title came.
That's really
because
because
you breathe how you want to feel, because breath. The other way that we thought, the other sort of idea I had for the title was a breath as a state changer. We can change our state, right? And that's very, very powerful. It's a very, very powerful when we have that ability to change our state. And we only have to know, just like an old school boombox, right? We can pull these levers on it. And again, it's not something that's super complicated, but we just need to do it. Once we have the knowledge, we just need to do it.
Exactly. That's really, it's giving people freedom, sharing them freedom without making it sort of cloaked in any kind of religion or cloaked with anything, but it's just dealing with the actual reality of taking breath. That's just amazing.
Because we breathe, Bob, we breathe between 20 and 30,000 times a day.
I know,
right?
21,600 times.
What's that?
21,600 times.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, chakra.
If we have, this is an interesting point. If our breathing is optimized, that's how many times we'd be breathing. But most of the people who I work with and meet and whatnot who have some sort of dysfunctional breathing, they're breathing between 30 and 40,000 times a day.
Really? Oh,
yeah. And why are they breathing that way? Because they're breathing through their mouth, and they're over breathing. They're breathing too much. So when you walk around today, look around at people and watch. People will have their mouth open, and especially when they're scrolling and they have their phone, their mouth is agape, and they're sort of like it becomes this. And what ends up happening is that when you're breathing in this way, your body senses some sort of struggle that is going, some sort of threat. Like, why are you breathing this way? And so it is always on guard. There isn't this sort of spaciousness and relaxation that happens. It's always on guard. And when it's always on guard, again, those stress hormones are released. So the way that people are breathing itself is stressing them out, not to mention, because we already have enough stressors. I mean, Lord knows that what is happening in our country right now is enough, right? We don't need to be exacerbating it with the way that we're breathing. So, yeah. And, the way that I present this is that in the beginning of the book, I have those five tools to do that we can hone their skills, and then we apply those in the way. Yeah, the 5 tools. The first one actually isn't breathing, and it's not because I'm a Buddhist either that I say that. The first one is awareness. We need to be. We have to have this ability to recognize what is happening within our system, and that this is sort of a particular kind of awareness called interoceptive awareness. So we have this interoceptive awareness, and then once we have that, then we can have these dials on our nervous system that you said, that you talked about. Then the option between breathing through our nose or our mouth, how that affects what that does, and then the fourth one is our short breath holds. They're just sub maximal breath holds, 5 to 10 seconds. And this is like a superpower. It's amazing. If you want to, or for all of the meditators who are listening, if you want to stop thinking about what you're thinking about, hold your breath.
Absolutely.
Immediately your body says it turns away from the rumination, from
Right.
the rumination, and turns into it's like, what are you doing? Like, why are you
Mm-hmm.
doing this? So it turns that perception internally immediately. And when I say holding the breath, it's not like these it's not long breath holds. They're these short breath holds. And I sort of talk about in the book like why that is very effective. And the
Mm-hmm.
last tool is integration.
Mm-hmm.
And I use that example. Have you ever heard the story, The Long Road to the Zafu?
No, we'll go to the Zafu. No,
So,
I
the
think.
Zafu is this sort of in Zen, we have this sort of meditation cushion. And when we learn to meditate, we're all super stoked. We're super excited. And we want to, and so we're like meditating, 2 hours a day. And our guru told us to do whatever. And everything is all set up. And we're always returning to the Zafu for the first 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And then the honeymoon starts to sort of like set in a little bit, and you know that you should be doing it. And you look over at your Zafu, and your Zafu is looking back at you, and there's sort of this longing to go back there. And then pretty soon after a few weeks, you look down to it, but you don't quite go and sit on it. You do everything before you do it. You light some incense, you go clean your water bowls, you sweep the room.
Right.
It's the long road to the Zafu.
It is. It is.
And that's what I mean by integration. We have to actually do it. It's one thing to know that if you extend your exhale, it's relaxing. It's another
Yeah.
thing to do it when you go onto the interstate to actually do it.
Uh-huh.
It's another thing like when your partner says that thing that annoys you, whatever, to extend your exhale rather than
Yeah.
just fall prey to our habitual reactions. All of the klesha. Because I had in mind the whole time I'm writing this book about klesha, about our habitual
Yeah.
reactions. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't use the word klesha in it. I don't use any Sanskrit. I don't think I use.
Don't you
Oh no,
actually?
kevalam kumbhaka. I think I used that one phrase, but that's it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, vowels breathing. Klesha is people wrongly translate as affliction. It should be addiction. Actually, that's
It's
what klesha.
addiction is such a good,
Really,
yeah,
but like emotional addiction, mental addiction.
yeah,
Because the reason it's difficult to get rid of klesha is that it seems to people get deceived and think it's helping them. Like when
yeah,
they get angry, they think they're becoming powerful, and when they get greedy and obsessed, they think that gives them energy. And it seems to, but it's like an addictive thing. It wears you out and it ruins you. And then you explain very well using neuroscience terms, hormones and things. I think that's really good.
yeah,
The way you use that language, I think, is excellent. Now, I wanted to ask you something in that light. I'm dying to ask you this. You mentioned that when you breathe through the nostril, that you get more nitric oxide in your system.
yeah,
Why? Where does it come from? Because of is it come from the sinuses or the brain, or like
yeah, yeah.
where does the nitric oxide come from when as you breathe, do more nose breathing, which I think is a big insight for people. I think
Yeah.
people were very interested in that.
Yeah. And just to say, nitric oxide is a vasodilator and a
Yeah,
bronchodilator, right? So it opens up, it opens us up, both
right,
sort of literally in space, but it also creates more blood flow and it creates more oxygen delivery where we want oxygen to go to. But the
right.
question you say is like, why is it I write in there about that we create nitric oxide within our system. And the place that is its highest concentration is within the turbinates, within the paranasal passageway.
I
So
see.
as we breathe in through the nose, it's not just like a hallway that goes down our esophagus. It goes through like a maze, almost like a conch shell. If you look at a bisection of a conch shell, it goes through these alleyways and little and that hole within there. If you take your fist, that's about the size of the paranasal passageway as it moves through it, as we breathe in. And within that paranasal passageway, it's lined with a hair, with like this, it's called cilia. And within that hair is mucus. And that mucus is very, very beneficial. It is antimicrobial and antibacterial. And within that mucus is where nitric oxide is produced, right? So,
Really? So
yeah,
great.
it's so that nitric oxide is produced, and nitric oxide is very beneficial for us to inhale, right? And so so if you're continually breathing in and out of your nose, and this is only one of the reasons, there's many reasons that include moisturizing the air, purifying the air, warming the air before it moves into our lungs, which have a low defense mode, our lungs do. So if we breathe into our mouth, then we don't get all of the benefit that when we breathe in through the nose.
Right.
So as the air passes through, it carries that nitric oxide into our lungs. And amazingly, the practice of humming increases nitric oxide production in the paranasal passageway between 15 and 20%. Right?
Wow.
So if we hum or if we om, right? It's the same. Right? I took a step back. I'm like, what is actually happening when if you remove the narrative behind what om means? Okay, let's just set that aside for a moment. What is physiologically happening when we say om? Om. You can feel the vibration that's happening below your eyes and behind your eyebrows. It's the same thing that if you om or if you hum or if you om you're still vibrating this, right? So you're creating all of this nitric oxide. And then importantly, Bob, that after you om or after you hum, if you inhale through your nose, then you're collecting all of that higher concentration of nitric oxide and you breathe that into your lungs and it has all kinds of benefits. So that's a little bit of a long answer to what happens with nitric oxide. Yeah. Well, not nitrous oxide, not nitrous oxide, nitric oxide.
Nitric. Yes, no, I know. And people should know that the weightlifters in Venice Beach and stuff, they are pumping themselves up with nitric oxide. So because it is a vasodilator and helps you build muscle and so forth. And they take huge amounts of pills to take nitric oxide. And then the other thing that I'm sure you know, but I think the basic reader doesn't know, is that Tibetans, because of living at high altitude with a low oxygen level, 47% oxygen level at around 10, 11, 12,000 feet, that they have 100 times more production of nitric oxide in their system than a sea level person. And that's what gives them their ability to do a lot of things at high altitude, which we can't, like.
Exactly.
Carrying a heavy pack, and then some Tibetan guys with you helping you, and then your pack is so heavy, and then he just picks it up, hikes ahead of you, and then you feel kind of embarrassed, because we don't make that much nitric oxide that easily. So that's how they get the oxygen to the extremities in their circulatory system.
Yeah.
So people are doing themselves a huge favor. And then that relates to the other thing. Since I read the book, I've been mouth taping at night, or trying to.
Oh, you have been? Wonderful.
Yes. And I think it helps, but unfortunately, sometimes I take it off while I sleep, and I wake up and it's over on the table next, which I didn't realize. So, but I'm working at it, and I think it's helping my sleep, actually.
Yeah. And the reason that we mouth tape, Bob, is that so there's all of these, the mantra of this book, if you had a mantra, is keep it nasal, right? Like we want to be breathing through our nose. Yeah, keep it nasal. We should have a Menla t-shirt that says hashtag keep it nasal.
Keep it nasal. And it would be great to have and then you put a face on it with the two conch shells, because it's on two sides, right?
Yeah.
So you paranasal chamber.
The paranasal passageway.
Passageways. And looking like a nautilus or something, or like a conch shell, right?
Yeah. Bob, it's amazing. If you have one of these long, like Q-tips, like a medical Q-tip, and you were to put it into your nose, because when we breathe, often we think that we're breathing, the air is going straight down. But in fact, the air is going to the back of our head. We breathe, like right now, if you breathe in through the nose, you're breathing horizontally backwards to the back of your head, and then it goes down the esophagus. And if you put this Q-tip, you can put it all the way to the back. It's amazing how far it goes in. And that's all of this space that we have in the paranasal passageway that we benefit from when we breathe through the nose. But we also want to be breathing through the nose when we sleep.
It might also make people less vulnerable to flus and things if they learn to really channel
and children as well. Not only sort of airborne illnesses, but also for the the health of your teeth and of your jaw and whatnot. Because what ends up happening when you breathe through your mouth is that you're over breathing. So you're ventilating too much. And while it might not be what we call hyperventilation, mouth breathing leads to things like brain fog and lack of ability to concentrate, lack of ability to stay focused when you're meditating, right? Let alone focusing on a screen or when we're working all day. We also when we breathe through the mouth all the time, is that we end up expelling more H2O, and we dry the mouth out, we dry the lips out, and we end up having less sort of moisture within the system than we want, right?
Right.
So yeah, and so we want to be able to breathe through the nose while we're sleeping, but many people have a challenge with this. And so then if you're snoring, you're definitely breathing through your mouth at night. And
I don't, but people have apnea even by breathing.
yeah, obstructive sleep. If you have obstructive sleep apnea, for sure that's happening. If you wake up with a dry mouth, if you have to get up many times during the night to pee, all of these are indicators that you're a mouth breather at nighttime. And
how
so
do you take your mouth with a massage?
it totally works. It totally
really?
works. Yeah, it totally works. So when we say tape our mouth,
I have a tiny little tape only in the middle. Shouldn't it be a little broader type of tape?
So let's talk about listeners, do not use duct tape or any household tape, right? You want to use a medical tape, like a very, very porous, that kind of paper tape that you can get any pharmacy at CVS.
Okay.
And when the idea here isn't to seal your lips so you can't, the idea isn't to seal it shut. The idea is to train the lips, the jaw, and the tongue to be in the optimal position for breathing, right? So it's a very gentle. It's very gentle. And so when we tape the mouth closed, people do it different ways. That you could tape the whole mouth, but I just do it like a stamp-sized piece, a little bit larger than a stamp-sized piece of this micro tape of this porous paper tape, and then it's just right in the middle. Almost looks like a Groucho Marx mustache, but just moved down over the top of your lips, right? And it's very interesting because I do the same thing. What I recommend is the same thing that that Mingyur Rinpoche recommended to me when I was asking him about, we were doing this sort of dream practice, and he had this, this thing is that when you're lying down, is that you remind yourself to remember your dream. As soon as the dream starts, to recall, I'm dreaming, and then just to observe that, adopt that witnessing mode of attention. And then if you want to actually do things within the dream. Well, I took that and I apply it to this mouth taping, is that you tape your mouth and you just remind yourself, I'm going to breathe through my nose all night. And I have a little protocol in there. So, and then you just roll over to your side and go to sleep. You kiss your loved ones goodnight because you probably aren't going to talk a whole lot. Now the tape is weak enough that should you need to force your mouth open, it's totally fine. And as you said, sometimes you wake up and it's like in your hair or it's on the side of on your pillow. Sometimes it comes off, or sometimes you open your mouth. But after
that is so cool. So in daytime, but by now, having done that for some time yourself, you probably naturally keep your lips closed without, even if you don't absolutely tape it every night. It gets you trained yourself, right?
Yeah, it's just a habit, and the good thing about habits is that they can be trained, and and that we can change them. And this is the thing about breathing, is if we are mouth breathing, if we're doing other forms of dysfunctional breathing, then all it takes is a bit of mindfulness awareness to bring attention to it, and then we change it. There are certain things that are a little bit easier to alter than others, but it's all the consequences of not doing it are dire, because it affects our physical health, it affects ourselves cognitively, and especially if you want to then do anything onto the path, it affects our Dharma practice, So, and I was thinking about this morning, Bob, before we got on, is that if I'm chanting, oftentimes when we're chanting, right, we will do this thing where we take this like big mouth breath, So we get done with like a 4 lines, like a shloka or something. We get done, and then we're like, and we keep it going. And I've observed that when people are doing this, it seems as though they're almost hyperventilating. And so myself, I actually pause. Like when I need to, at the end, I will take then slow inhale through the nose, and then I chant. And the chanting is kind of long, and it's this extended exhale essentially, and it's with the mouth open because we're voicing, which is just totally fine. But then when we need to inhale, rather than instead of that, just closing the lips and inhaling through the nose. And this has changed, like it has brought so much more freshness, and it doesn't have the mind sink after that like longer sadhana practice.
Very good solution. Actually, when I recite long mantras on a retreat, I inhale the mantra. In other words, I do use the mouth, but I do it like so I inhale with the mantra. I do that, and because you murmur a low voice when you don't sing loudly. But it would be ideal to be able to actually inhale it while still mouthing. While still if you're saying it, but the idea of pausing and inhaling through the nostrils and then going on with it, I think that's a very good idea.
Yeah, I mean, just give it a go, and the listeners, just give it a go, and just like Isolina says, like if it works, but use it, and if it doesn't work, just keep it on the shelf.
Totally cool. Totally cool. And I wonder, like people who do running and things like that, but they don't breathe through the nose. They probably
I train. I breathe through my nose when I run and when I cycle. Unless you move into the
runners, are they aware of this? The professional runners?
Absolutely. The top 100 meter and 200 meter woman, is her on the U.S. Olympic team. She's a total nasal breather. You watch. It's amazing. Yeah. And so there's a number of these athletes.
They're aware of this in the sense that they cultivate that habit.
They cultivate this. Yeah. They cultivate this. And so that's what I do in the book. I have these like 5 tools. And then the second part of the book, I have it sort of applying it to our day-to-day breathing, to sleeping, to exercise before and during and after, to meditation and flow states. And so that's the first part, and the second part of the book is sort of applying these to our everyday. And we can begin to train. It's not like it has to be separate. It's just like the Dharma. It's not like our Dharma practice is just when we're on the cushion reciting. So we can do this when we're carrying groceries in, is keep it nasal. And when you arrive in there and you want to take that big deep breath, just slow down and keeping the breath nasal. And we'll begin to slowly train it begins to train ourselves to be able to breathe in this light, slow, and deep manner throughout the day.
May my breathe light practice benefit my body and mind so that I can be of service to my family and community. Wonderful.
Bob, the reason that's the Buddhist part. In all of the guided practices, there's lots of guided practices in the book. I always begin it with a motivation and a dedication. And on many different podcasts, people who don't have any association with Buddhism, they're sort of in the wellness, they ask me like, why do you do that? And I remember
it doesn't have to be associated with Buddhism, actually.
It doesn't.
Because the concept is, Buddhism or some sort of religion, and then they get all tangled up in and actually Buddhism is actually into dealing with reality.
Yeah.
Consider Buddhism more educational and scientific than religious, actually.
Yeah. Because it was about 12 years ago, Bob. So I've been teaching to some university professors and whatnot, and Matteo Ricard came to one of the events. They had him, and they had me there as well. And Matteo was sitting next to me, and one of the professors says, Matteo Pistono, he's our meditation teacher. And Matteo sort of gave me this sort of funny look, and he leaned over. He says, "Oh, so you're teaching meditation now?" And I sort of laughed, and he said, "Always begin with the motivation and always end with the dedication." And it was like this Kalyana Mitra. It was like the older spiritual friend was reminding me, and that's one reason why I still do this. Always begin that and bookend our practice with it. Yeah.
It's amazing. alternate, or you have alternate nostril breathing. I didn't get to this one. That looks very
Did you get to
interesting.
the last part, Bob? Part
Mhm.
3?
I looked at it, but not enough to
Yeah,
share.
so because my breath practice started when I first moved, before I met you, I
Mhm.
lived in Nepal. And when I first went to Kathmandu, I was at Kopan Monastery. I was sort of studying at Kopan because Lama Zopa was my first teacher.
Who
And I
was
was studying
Lama Yishi?
Lama Zopa Rinpoche.
Lama Zopa, yeah.
Yeah. And there was a nun at Kopan named Ani Karen. And she was like really my first teacher, I could say that she was the first one that sort of taught me what to do. And
Mhm.
I was living down in Kathmandu next to the Bagmati River. And the Bagmati is a tributary to the Ganges.
Yeah, sure.
And so Ani
Pali
Karen's,
Temple.
yeah,
Mhm.
Pashupati, right next to Pashupati. Where I lived every day, I saw them carrying these bodies down to the river, these corpses. And
Mhm.
I was fresh off the boat. Like I'm just an American kid from Wyoming, having arrived in Nepal in my 20s, and I had
Mhm.
never even seen death.
Wow.
And so it was very powerful for me to see this. And Ani Karen had taught me about this anapanasati, right? Just breath awareness practice. This was the first thing she taught me, was
Mhm.
just breath awareness. And the second thing she said is just
Mhm.
go down to and sit on the riverside and
Mhm.
just observe these bodies being cremated. They would set them on these like wooden pyres, and they
Yeah.
would take the shroud off of them and put the marigolds and anoint the body and circumambulate a bit, and then they would light it on fire. And then 3 or 4 hours later, everything would be dust, and they would brush everything into the river.
Mhm.
So for about 6 months, this was my main practice. I would do my breathing meditation in the morning, and then I would go and sit by the
Wow.
riverside and just watch these bodies being burned. So
Mhm.
my my breath practice was sort of, it started with this practice of impermanence, or contemplating impermanence. And that's
Mhm.
why this last part of the book is the practice of which I titled Breathe How You Want to Die.
Mhm.
Because this, I had this under like this, I don't know if it was like not really a realization, but just kind of an awareness of, I
Mhm.
remember it's very powerful. The strongest thing I took away from there is that when I was sitting there, I was just thinking, whatever I do today might be the last time I do it.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
there's no saying. Like, this cappuccino in front of me, it could be the very last cappuccino I ever have. And that's what that practice brought was, and I thought, then it extended towards the exhale. Like when I exhale, there is no guarantee that I'm going to inhale. It might be because that's the only thing guaranteed in life, that at some point we're going to exhale and we're not going to inhale.
Not in this body.
Yeah, in this body, right? And so that's why I end up with this book, is that we use breathing to live fully and seize the day and use it for like optimal breathing and exercise and flow states and all the rest. But news break, we're going to die.
Yes.
And this breath is going to be, for me, like having, I hope that to carry the blessings of my teachers and the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas with me, but still the agency that I have in this
Mhm.
life is going to ride on the breath.
Mhm.
And that's why I share these practices, because it's been the main practice since that time, since 30 years ago, of
Mhm.
the sort of contemplating death and the death rehearsal practices.
Mhm. Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, you're doing all the 8 dissolutions and everything here.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah, I had that in there. Geshe Tashi at Jamyang, I studied that with Geshe Tashi at Jamyang Buddhist Center in London. We
Mhm.
would go through those death rehearsals, again and again and again. Yeah.
Mhm. That's wonderful. Really wonderful, wonderful. It makes I'm always thinking of Yun Man. Did you ever read Tom Cleary's Blue Cliff Record translation?
No.
It's Cleary, never read that. It's really quite marvelous. You would love it. There's a one of the koans, public cases, as he calls it, of the famous Yun Man in Chinese, Yun Man, Uman in Japanese, but Yun Man in Chinese. And somebody asked him, what is it when the tree withers and the leaves fall? And Yunman says, body exposed in the golden wind. I was like that. I like that very much.
Yeah,
It's beautiful. Death rehearsal meditation. That's very good. People shouldn't worry about that though, because in fact, the more you're aware of death, then the more vital you feel alive.
absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
the more cool you are about living. And in fact, when it's the last cappuccino, boy, do you enjoy that cappuccino. Just don't ask an Italian waiter for a cappuccino in the evening.
Exactly. Well, after 11:30 even.
That's right.
It's true.
They look
It's
at you like you're not quite human, actually. You don't know what life is. It's only espresso in the evening.
Yeah.
Never cappuccino. Really, I like cappuccino more because I don't like coffee that much. So I always do that, and I dare to do that. But
Yeah,
so do you have any roots in Italy, Matteo? The name Matteo.
I do. I do. Up near Torino,
What do
in
we
a
say?
small village called Osegna. It's a small village, is where the Pistono family's from. And I went there. I went to high school for a year in Italy, and I went back
Yeah.
and saw
So
my relatives there.
where is it? In which part of Italy?
In the northwest, just about
Oh,
60 miles south of the French border.
okay, cool.
Right, so up in the right in the foothills of the mountains there, above Torino, and
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So and I remember my grandfather used to, when he would tell us, like, we'd come in and he would say "Sala la porte, sala la porte." And he would say that, which is essentially French for
Yeah.
close the door.
I,
Instead of chiudi la porta, he would say, and so my grandfather spoke this dialect. It had a very, very strong French influence on it.
that's really nice. Last year I was at Mandali, some retreat place up over one lake, not Como, but a lake further west. I think near that. Kind of
Hmm.
very high. You'd have to go up. It was like a road. It was like in Bhutan. It was such a narrow road and winding up a hill. And then you got to the top of the hill. You look down this lake. Really, it's beautiful. Italy is wonderful. Really, really wonderful.
Yeah.
And
Bob,
I
can I ask you a question here
sure
about relating back to what we were? So are you doing, like, you've been, I mean, you've been practicing the Dharma for, like, what,
65 years.
65 years, I suppose, or something, right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
And
I'm 80.
so, yeah. And so are you, do you work with death and dying practices? You
Oh,
have, you sort of said the awareness, but with death rehearsal, or is it more
sure.
about, like, the dissolution practices after your sadhana? Or how do you work
Oh,
with
all
it?
the time. I'm always working with that. I like working very much. I do joint things often with Andrew Holacek, who's very good at that. And he deals with some aspects of death, and I go through the Book of the Dead with that, and
Hmm.
totally am into that. I think it's very, very important. We do 2 or 3 retreats a year together on that, and I like to do it with him because he takes care of all kinds of practical matters about death. Now lately he's gotten all gaga about dark retreats,
Yeah.
uh, things like that, and he's very. I think I don't know. He had a 3-year retreat in the past, but maybe he didn't do much psychedelics. And so he's very into ketamine now, which I'm not that fond of, but it's useful because you have to let go completely.
Yeah.
Um, and so he's experimenting with all those sort of things. Andrew, he's a Kagyu, had a
Yeah.
3.3-year retreat. And I like to do that. Yeah, definitely. I mean, among my books, I think the death one, Book of the Dead, which I didn't want to do. I only did it because Geshe Wangyal made me do it in a funny way. And I thought, well, Trungpa has one, and there's the Old Reverend's Wens, and so on. And but then I did it, and it has been by far my most popular book, absolutely.
Yeah.
But very slowly. But I mean, 800,000, something like that, and been 18 languages or something like that. Really long.
Yeah.
Because I made it where I kept breaking and having notes in the middle of it. Where now, if you don't want to see Vairocana, try the Virgin Mary or Jesus or Moses or somebody.
Yeah.
Isaac Luria. In other words, use somebody in your own tradition. because this is something everybody does. It's not a matter only Buddhists die,
Yeah.
Don't die this way. This is a report back from people who lucidly died.
Yeah.
So I do that, And
I did that at the beginning of the death rehearsal practice in Breathe How You Want to Feel. I took your cue on that, where placing the head, and if you want to place an image of the Virgin, or of the Buddha, or of your teacher, or of the Virgin Mary, or of Jesus, whatever is the embodiment of
Yes.
truth and peace.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
it's so liberating, death is really fun. I have an audio that's on the place in Boulder, whatever it's called. That
Chautauqua.
no, it's an audio that's sold. What do you call
Oh,
it?
yeah.
I can't remember names when I need to at my age. But anyway, that audio is so much fun that it was recorded from a live thing. And one lady who has since died, but luckily didn't die then, she said to me at lunchtime during that, she said, "Oh, Bob, you make death sound like so much fun. I can't wait to try it." Because letting go like that is, of course, a release. It's like an orgasmic release,
Yeah.
Yes, and naturally, if you're not fighting it, of course, if you're able to let go. So
Yeah.
training for that is very, very important, to go and be calm and go cool into clear light. It's very, very cool.
Yeah. That's the reason that is exactly the reason why in the preliminary practice that I suggest in here is this letting go practice of this aspirating.
Love it in work. I think it's very good. Breathing your last breath. That's your chapter 13. Very good auspicious number. And it's really, really good. I think it's great that you've come up with this. And you do it as a reality thing. You mentioned the Buddhists, which is okay, but you do it as a reality thing, which is the way it should be done,
Yeah.
His Holiness is, I'll never forget His Holiness in Harvard Divinity School, in one of his first trips to America, where I happened to be translating at that time. And he's telling all the theologians there that he wants them to know right away. They just met him, but he wants them to know he doesn't believe in God. And I'm like saying in Tibetan, "Jonas, you don't have to say that right away. Come on, don't shock them like you can, you have a different idea about it, all this and so on and so on." I said, "No, I want them to know right away." He then just doesn't respond to me in Tibetan. He says in English. And then he says to them, "I want you to know that I don't right away, because you might get to like me if you didn't know that. And then later you would decide, and then you would think I was a great person and a good person. And then later you would find out I don't believe in God, and you might faint." He said. But he's always saying, and then he was going on about how he was correcting the Buddhist view that he had himself, that without Buddhism, you probably can't really get enlightened. And he said, since he met Merton and some saints in Spain and some other people, he decided Christianity, you could definitely become enlightened. And he's met Muslims and so forth. And he was going on like that about how it's necessary not just to tolerate other religions, but to really consider that whatever your goal is, they can reach it in their own way. He thinks that's very, very important.
Yeah.
And I'm very much into that. I'm totally follow that. It took me a while. My first 30 years, I would say, I was quite enthusiastic in a way where I thought, well, without the Dharma, you've had it, But
Bob, I was the same way. There was
so much myself.
sort of kind of a Buddhist chauvinist almost.
Yeah, well, Buddhists are chauvinists, normal. And like everybody has a little chauvinism about themselves.
Yeah.
But actually the Buddha did not, and even Buddha, there was no Buddhism when Buddha was teaching.
Yeah.
It was just his teaching,
Yeah.
And then they use Buddha about Pacceka Buddha about other things, Buddha means. But I'm very annoyed though with people translators nowadays. It's not just awakening. The Tibetans had the best translation, Sangye, right? Sang is awakening, but Ye means expanding to know everything about life, So it's much more enlightenment. We really need enlightenment.
Yeah.
I was doing an audio of my book with your publisher, our publisher, and today, And I realized that I finally appreciated His Holiness's gratitude to materialist scientists. And I was telling them in the audio that in commentary on something I was writing in the book, I wrote in the book, but I always get after them about their materialism because it's so dogmatic and it's unscientific.
Yeah.
But actually, their analysis of matter, even where they've now gotten down where they've totally lost in dark matter and dark energy, they just completely going in dark black holes and what have you. They're completely beside themselves, and they don't know what's going on. And they've sort of hit that point. And but the fact that they've analyzed it like that, like when you do mindfulness or you do madhyamaka analysis, seeing through things, so to speak, there, when you can use in your thought experiment, which is what that kind of vipassana meditation is, it's thought experiment, and you combine with some one pointedness, and when you use that, they're taking a part of the atom, and they're probing the mystery of the quantum foam and all this kind of thing, is really helpful.
Yeah.
It's very, very helpful. And the fact that they still insist on dogmatically trying to say there's no mind and reifying nothingness into the ultimate is a shame. But in a way, it's good that they did that, because that saved them from being oppressed by the church, as they were terrorized and burnt even occasionally by the church, like Giordano Bruno, your fellow Italian there. And then they were able to really investigate everything. And then now that's bringing them around full blast, where they're meeting the inner science from the Dharma. The Indian inner science, as His Holiness likes to call it, not just Buddhism. And that will create the new age. That really will. But they're still resisting it, and they can't quite get it, and they think they have to stick to their materialism. A good friend of mine who works with me. But I was shocked. I heard him today in promoting his book. He was saying about how, Nirmanakaya, that's crazy. You can have many bodies. That's crazy. Well, even Daniel Dennett and, Hofstadter and Dennett,
Dennett just passed away, I think, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. He was a classmate. He was one class below me at high school, prep school. So I knew him. And, but he wouldn't be, I argued with him, but he wouldn't ever entertain the idea of the mind really being a force in nature, like energy, He wouldn't, he was.
Yeah, he didn't even, I think Dennett didn't even sort of give to the idea that mind or consciousness was an emergent property of the physical. He just said it didn't exist.
Well, he did sort of think that, but then they did have these thought experiments themselves, where by thinking of how you could occupy a robot. And so a single consciousness could be in many bodies by occupying many robots and directing their activities simultaneously. It would be quite possible. So why on earth do they think that a Nirmanakaya is so impossible for someone who can be on the inside of all sorts of things? They have to be open-minded. I'm going to have to get after that dear friend of mine. I didn't realize that he was going all wacky about the Nirmanakaya, And they just people just can't manage the infinite framework. But anyway, that's another conversation. We have to do that again. But I'm so thrilled by your breathing book. I really am. I think it's just totally awesome. And everyone should buy it and read it and work with it. I'm trying to. I never finish anything nowadays. I'm much too busy to finish anything. But I'm enjoying it enormously. And I learned so much from it already. And really, look at this. Expelling too much carbon dioxide when you breathe through the mouth. This is really great. Increasing the tidal volume of air that causes imbalance of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Stimulating your sympathetic nervous system, keeping you constantly on guard and paranoid. Increasing upper chest movement that weakens your core stability, causing back pain.
These are all the downfalls, to use Buddhist term, all the downfalls of mouth breathing.
That's right. Constricting your smooth muscles, surrounding blood vessels and airways. Wow. Limited physical, people with high blood pressure, they really need this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Doctors don't teach this. No. They should teach this.
Yeah, my mother, she took this book. She has COPD, and she took it to her physician, and he said, "You should be doing all of these things." And she said, "Well, why haven't you told me to do them before?"
Exactly. Because why? Because the incentives are skewed in a for-profit medicine system.
Yeah, this
You don't
this
want
is
to
the
give
most cost
people
of the
agency.
breath is so cost effective. It
Yeah,
doesn't.
you don't want them to have agency about their own health. In
Mhm.
fact, fighting yoga and you're fighting chiropractic and you're fighting nutritionists and you're fighting all this stuff because you want to be the one who moderates their monitors their health. I mean, it isn't just greed, it's just the way the system is set up.
Yeah.
You know, and limiting physical capacity and enjoyment for sports and exercising, setting you up for poor sleep quality and promoting overbreathing. I
Yeah.
mean, that list is fantastic. I mean, you did a lot of medical research. You said your mother is a physician?
No, she's not a physician, but I did dive deeply the last few years into respiratory science. And it's like in the field it's sort of like it's huge right now, and because there's many different fields, not only in like sort of athletics and whatnot, but all across the board. But it's not as though this should be just be left at a kind of theoretical or for the for the Djokovic's and LeBron James of the world. We can apply these, like even just like right before this podcast, Bob, I wanted to soak my brain with more energy, with more oxygen. So I just 2 minutes, I just stood right here and I did what I talk about in the book. I just did submaximal breath holds, and I would feel this, I just felt this rising energy. And it's not like one thing that in Breathe How You Want to Feel, I'm not pushing any kind of belief. I don't want anybody to like just take it and just try it on for size, and one won't be able to deny because they actually feel, because we're just talking about physiology here. And I mean, and most of the time it's general. I mean, if some people are like very, very, very stressed out, anxious, if they're already in some sort of
Keep the nasal.
keep it there. You found the mantra. Keep.
It's outstanding. And then when you were 12, my dentist noticed my dysfunctional breathing pattern due to tongue thrusting.
Yeah.
Swallow, which all of us do about 1,200 times a day. My tongue pushed forward against my bottom teeth, causing me to swallow with my mouth open. Additionally, my tongue habitually rested on the bottom of my mouth, which led to slouched shoulders and a head position that jutted forward. And I didn't even have smartphone viewing to blame. When I look at old photos from this age, I see my mouth agape in many of them. It's so outstanding, Matthew.
Yeah.
It's marvelous. Talk about mindfulness. And then you quote Dr. Stephen Lin, The Dental Diet. That's really good.
Yeah.
I think people should really wake up and really take charge of their life. And this is a beautiful way of helping them do it. I have to finish reading it now. If I hadn't finished the whole thing, I'm going to definitely finish it. Absolutely.
Well, I
And
appreciate that, Bob. I mean, when you told me that you had it and that you were reading it, like I was so overjoyed that one of my own, like I consider you one of my teachers. The first book I read was it called Cool Revolution or Inner Revolution?
Inner Revolution, yeah.
Yeah.
But it talked about
that book blew my mind.
Oh, good, wonderful.
And you know why? Because I had been studying the Dharma already.
Yes.
But I had been about 4 years into reading A Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. I was studying Pabanka Rinpoche's commentary on it.
Yes.
And your book was like, because it just spoke so directly to me I think mainly because of the language. You had this language that could just cut through.
Well, that's the thing, to make it real for people. And also, but I don't know, I'm sure I haven't done an audible of that book because of whatever, the press, but I should probably. But although the next one I wrote called Infinite Life, I did an audible and I really liked all of it. That one I might want to correct and smooth out a little bit if I did it now.
Yeah.
But I'm still learning a lot, and there's an infinite amount to learn, so that's okay.
Isn't that true?
Well, this is a great year for me, though. It's the Wood Dragon year. The last one was 1964, which is the year I first met His Holiness personally. I'd seen him in 62 in the hare year, in the Earth hare year. But
you saw him in 1962. Where? You must have been in Dharamsala or in?
Met him in Delhi. I went there in 62, 61, 62. I dropped out of Harvard and went there and so. But I saw him, in a large setting, crowd setting. So I didn't really meet him, but then I met him personally in 64. So that was a wood dragon year. So it's been a 60-year cycle, And I'm so blessed. We're so blessed to have met these wonderful people. They really are. And they know how to breathe because they live where there's only 47% of the oxygen. And they must do a lot without knowing it. They must. I don't think that the scientist who wrote that I read somewhere about how they produce 100 times more nitric oxide than we do. And it's a mixture of nitric oxide with the half of the oxygen that we have at sea level that enables them, but it enables women to produce placenta in the womb, which is why Chinese women cannot very well produce babies. When they get pregnant, and Chinese officials, they send them down to Chengdu or Xining, somewhere low altitude, because at the high altitude, with the less oxygen, they can't produce enough placenta. So there's danger of miscarriage at the high altitude. Only Tibetan women can do that. But they never associate it with maybe involuntarily because they probably never examine. But the Tibetan people naturally may do nasal breathing. They may be keeping it nasal.
Yeah.
They might. I bet, if you look into it, you might find that. They more keep it nasal,
Yeah.
And we got to do that T-shirt. If you don't do it, I'll do it. I really will.
Let's do it together. No, Bob, let's do it together.
I always attribute this. Keep it nasal, page 114. That's you. We really did. And that's what we have to do. We have to ground things in reality and in a scientific way, That's what His Holiness is teaching us.
Yeah.
Really great.
And Bob, I hope that you'll get to see His Holiness, because he's in New York City right now, because His Holiness is in New York, and I hope you get to see him soon.
Oh, I think he's going upstate somewhere to hide.
Okay.
He does more rehab.
Yeah.
And he's not been seeing anybody, They
figured
back. Sometimes they don't always write me back when I demand, isn't that? Because I'm so an old hand with them all. But this time they actually wrote me back and they said, "Well, Bob, if you somehow could manifest as Joe Biden, we might break the rule because we're not seeing otherwise anybody." But I'm very glad he's here since we're in this total crisis,
Right? It's
a real crisis. Talk about breathing.
Oh, it's a proper crisis. Yeah.
Crisis. And the news, all they can talk about is Biden dying or something, Well, they don't talk about Biden's program of keeping the government alive and your Social Security and fixing the immigration and doing this and doing that. And the other guy taking everything away and giving rich people another tax cut and then giving Ukraine to Putin and destroying the world, basically. I mean, I personally think it should be insurrection. What do you call it? Insurrection act.
Yeah.
No, I think Biden should do that, actually. Personally, I just wrote a thing, but I don't know if it'll be published. Otherwise, I'll put it on my Substack. Nobody's pulling that trigger. They're writing all these, it's disaster, it can't happen, mustn't happen. Stephanopoulos told him, what will happen if you lose? Oh, I'll say I did my best, Biden says. We can't have that. There's no doing our best. We have to assure that this doesn't happen. Or we're betraying everybody. Because then all the dictators and all the conquerors are going to be fighting, and it'll be world war in Europe again, for sure. He'll go after Poland and he'll swallow the Baltics in 1 minute. If Trump hands him the Ukraine as he wants to do,
Yeah.
So it's not just inside this country, So anyway, keep it nasal.
Keep it nasal, exactly. But see, Bob, this is exactly the times. Like when we are flooded by the news or like whatever, like when the election comes, it is all the more important to be doing these things because we can have some impact, our vote can have some impact, but then we need to be able to regulate our nervous system.
Absolutely. People all agency.
It's important.
Listen, Matteo, I could go on forever.
Yeah.
This is probably what people expect in a podcast. Maybe we'll have to do another one. I'm going to read further, and maybe we can do a different one. But
we can do one on part 3 on death and dying and the breath and your understanding. You could
maybe we do one especially on the dead, dying, breathing thing.
Yeah, that
And
would be
maybe when you do that last exhalation, now that you think about, I wonder, I love a thing, just in conclusion, I want to say, I love the scene in the first Matrix where Morpheus is training Neo and they're doing martial arts. And Neo is winded at one point. And then he says to him, you think you're breathing air there? Because they're in the Matrix, right?
Yeah.
When they're doing that. And he was crashed against the wall or something. And then he says, you think you're winded or something. And do you really think you're breathing air there? Is that what you're doing? So I wonder if then in the Bardo, you immediately think you're inhaling. And in other words, you have exhaled and you leave the body.
Yeah.
And you in the Bardo, do you think you need to inhale? Well, of course you have to have it. And at first you have a body like your body, like in a dream.
Right.
And then when we think about, have you ever done lucid dreaming?
Yes.
Did you inhale in the dream?
I
Notice if you inhaled?
yeah, I did not notice that. I've never focused on breathing in the dream.
Well,
While lucid
we
dreaming.
normally don't focus on having a body, actually. We're just a point of awareness. Right? And I don't think, I've never seen a Tibetan instruction like Don Juan used to give to Carlos Castaneda long ago. I'm sure you remember that. I think you're old enough. Where he said the way to lucidly dream is to look at your hands in the dream. Try to program yourself to look at your hands, to become aware of your own body. Sometimes you are naturally aware of your body in a dream, but mostly. But one way of being lucid is to look at your body and realize you're in a dream. And then, are you breathing in the dream? Then that would be an interesting thing to do in a lucid dreaming practice.
Yeah.
I really think it's very important, not only the impermanence thing, but also for people to recognize that death is like a doorway into another life, immediate other life. There may be a little pass out for a day or two, but then you don't notice the time when you're completely passed out. Like you don't really count the hours while you're sleeping. If you're really asleep, you immediately wake up, even 8 hours later, because you don't have any sense of time when you're not having any cognitive activity going on. So I think that's an interesting topic. So your whole thing about gaining agency and not just noticing your breath and counting it, but becoming mindful of even how it affects your entire nervous system, how the mechanism is. It connects to when I was dropped off in Dharamsala in 1964 in the Wood Dragon year by Geshe Wangyal. He dragged a Tibetan Amji, a doctor, to the room we were staying in, and he said, you study medicine, you have to learn Tibetan medicine. And that was the first time I had an idea, after a supposedly privileged education, that I had a lung and a liver and a kidney and a spleen. And everyone knows a little bit about their brain, but I never had a bunch of organs in there. So what do they do, And suddenly they're connected to your tongue, because it connects to your heart, eyes and liver. I mean, your senses connect. Those are all very intuitive and very powerful, actually.
Yeah.
And like your imagination and your nervous system connects to your diaphragm. You are working you're working that territory. And I congratulate you 100%.
Thank you very much, Bob.
We'll broadcast it as soon as we can. I will cut out that part where I have to leave in the middle. And see you soon.
The Bob Thurman Podcast is produced through a Creative Commons No Derivatives license. Please be sure to like, share, and repost on your favorite social media platforms. And is brought to you in part through the generous support of the Tibet House US Menla membership community and listeners like you. To learn more about the benefits of Tibet House membership, please visit our websites at thus.org, menla.org, and bobthurman.com. Tashi Delek, and thanks for tuning in.